I think this must be about the top, I think. I must have peaked because I've never presented anything in quite a venue as this. It even echoes in here. This is quite amazing. What I want to do today really is talk in a couple of parts really. I want to give you a little bit of a snapshot as to where we are as an industry, as a dairy industry, and sort of how we arrived where we are in the last 30 years of milk quotas. And then go into a bit more detail on the system of farming that we've chosen and the reasons why we've chosen to farm in the way we do. And there'll be loads of time for sort of clarification and a bit more technical detail, I expect, later on in questions. So if I skip over a load of stuff that no one quite understands, please feel free to question at the end. So 30 years of milk quotas. I mean, I've been farming for almost 30 years. I left school sort of mid-80s, just after milk quotas had been imposed on us within the EU. And it's quite staggering how the industry has restructured over the last 30 or so years. We've lost almost 75% of our dairy herds. We've upwards of 40,000 dairy farmers or dairy herds are no longer there that were there when quotas were introduced. We're producing a lot more milk per cow. We haven't quite doubled our average yield per cow, but we've got a much more milky cow there, a much more efficient cow, many would believe. And quite amazingly, although we've got a lot less cows, we're still producing about 90% or so of the milk that we produced when quotas were first introduced, which is just an indication really of where the industry's come from over that period of time. So you could say, well, have milk quotas worked? Well, we certainly produce a lot less milk than we did back in 1984. This last year is maybe the exception of that. But what we've done in the process of producing less milk is we've managed to export quite a lot of the high-value dairy products overseas, and we're now we've lost, if you like, that value-added market. We seem to have become very good at producing commodities in the UK, giving away the high-value opportunity really that was there. And we've lost a lot of what were once small, traditional mixed dairy farms. The average herd size back in 1984 was sort of between 50 and 60 cows. And we've certainly seen more recently, with the more recent restructuring, a real split in the industry. We've seen people really specialize in intensive grazed block calving herds, or the exact opposite, intensive house units. And that is, of course, we've got every conceivable type of system in between, but we're certainly seeing a very defined split within the industry now, certainly compared to the past. And you've got to say, well, why has this massive restructuring happened really? And from my own perspective, it's been purely and simply down to economics. Why else? As dairy farmers, we have very little control over the price of the end product that we produce, and other than specializing in a sort of a niche market and marketing your own product, you've got little opportunity other than to expand your business, get the efficiencies of scale, and do that or go out of business. And I guess that's what a lot of dairy farms have chosen to do. So a little bit of crystal ball gazing really. We've certainly got into what is a very, very volatile position now. So the trend that we've seen, that the restructuring within the dairy industry is likely to continue. If the past is anything to go by, we're going to probably halve the number of dairy farmers within the next 10 to 15 years. So we'll be down to quite a small number of dairy farmers in the UK. And I certainly believe, with the data that we've got now, there's no reason why that won't continue. If anything, it's going to, the speed towards greater intensification because of market conditions is going to actually increase. We're seeing now, since the end of price support in 2007, where the norm was a sort of a 20% volatility from peak to trough, we're seeing now that's doubled. It's more like 45% from peak to trough. And it's highly likely to continue. I mean, this is my crystal ball gazing. I could be a million miles out with what's going to happen here, but this is basically what's going to happen. At some point during the next season, hopefully we stop dropping. There was some fairly good news from the global dairy trade overnight. We've seen a small increase. We're going to see dairy commodities start to rise again at some point during the next sort of 8 to 10 months. And we're into this sort of 3-year cycle, which isn't uncommon for any sort of globally traded commodities, really, and that's what sort of sets our milk price. But of course, we don't know what quotas, the removal of milk quotas from the end of March. We no longer have milk quotas in the EU. A lot of dairy farmers now have never farmed without milk quotas. We don't really know what impact that's going to have on the whole global situation and how that will affect our price. So that's the end of the crystal ball gazing. And this is perhaps what you came to hear. So I'll briefly explain really where we were 30 years ago. This was me leaving school at the sort of tender age of 16. Never really wanted to be anything else than a dairy farmer, but certainly wasn't encouraged to pursue any other career. So came home, did about 4 or 5 years of further education at the local college, and slotted into what was expected of me, I guess. We had a very small quota back then, 200,000 litres, 40 cows. I mean, this was the farm really that my grandfather moved to from Sussex in the late 1940s, and it hadn't really changed a great deal over that period of time. He came up with sort of 20 cows on a train from East Grinstead, set up camp, if you like, in Cumbria, and things hadn't really changed greatly. So there was a lot of development really that needed to happen on the farm. We had I was very ambitious and wanted to grow a business. Milk quota was very expensive, so we diversified into all sorts of other things, beef and sheep. But that was fairly typical of what there was around us at the time. A lot of small family dairy farms doing very similar. We desperately wanted to grow the dairy business, but the scale of what we had and the cost of the extra quota was really slowing us down. So it took us probably a good decade or so to get to 80 or 100 cows, and a lot of real hard work. Until about the mid-90s, I would say, probably 1996, I was fortunate enough to go to a BGS, British Grassland Society conference at Newton-Rigg, where they'd brought a couple of Irish dairy farmers across to speak about the benefits of New Zealand grazing systems. Ireland was exposed, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years to New Zealand consultants before we were. They sort of had consultants there, early 90s. And following this conference, we had the first New Zealand grazing consultants in the UK and started to establish grazing groups. And this really inspired me. You could see that these relatively small Irish farmers were managing to grow businesses to, what seemed to me at that time quite a big scale, but also they were profitable and they had a life to go with it, which to me, lambing 300 cows, milking 80 or 90 cows, doing all the work ourselves with no staff, just seemed to be a really desirable place to be. So it was really quite inspiring at that point. And I did actually think 100 cows was a big herd of cows there. So I decided I was going to challenge convention, really. Up until that point, we were going down the sort of conventional route of intensification, if you like. We were pedigree black and whites. We were moving towards more and more sort of extreme Holstein breeding, cows that needed an awful lot more care and attention than the old sort of Frisian cows that we used to have. We had a very poor work-life balance. I just met my wife. We were starting a family, and I suppose it's a bit of naivety, but for the first time I realized that other people outside farming sort of had a life. All her siblings, she's from a big family, they all had weekends off and holidays, and there was more to life really. So we decided that we would follow the sort of Irish example and move towards the grazing side. But this is basically what we had at that point. But the big challenge to growing a dairy herd back all the way through the 80s and the 90s was the massive cost of milk quota. Every single cow we put on, it was between £3,500 and £3,000 worth of quota that we had to invest in for permission really to milk that cow. So there was a lot of money tied up in growing a dairy business really, for very little reward, I guess. So contrast that really to where we are today. This is right up to date. The home farm at Cairnhead, that's grown from 60 hectares to about 180 hectares. 2/3 or so owned. We bought a farm next door in 2007, and we've grown that business successfully to about 400 spring calving cows. We've also taken on, as part of an equity partnership, Dolphinby, which is 15 or so miles away down near Penrith. That's just short of 700 acres, and we're going to calve just short of 600 cows this coming season there. We're just at the beginning of our fourth season at Dolphinby. And both units are operating almost identical low-cost grass-based systems, really. Really easily managed, profitable, robust dairy farms, looking for sort of moderate outputs of 5,500 litres, and around about a kilo of milk solids per kilogram of live weight, so upwards of about 500 kilograms of milk solids per cow. We've got a system of farming actually that provides an excellent work-life balance now for everyone, not only the owners but also the staff. We like to think that we're sort of the preferred employers, and we can attract people to work for us fairly easily. We've changed completely from the old sort of Northern Hemisphere Holstein type cows for a good sort of 20 years now. We've been breeding New Zealand cross genetics, so we've got a bit of Kiwi cross in there, a bit of Jersey. Our ideal cow would be probably 25 to 30% Jersey, 3/4 New Zealand black and white. A really efficient cow, highly fertile, produces really well off grass, high milk solids, so reasonably high value for our product. But what we've done in changing the way we farm is we've taken a lot of control over our biggest cost on the farm, which is actually feeding the cow. So we've built a very robust dairy model there that can actually cope at, almost every milk price, because we've probably got now to a potential milk price that maybe isn't so attractive, but hopefully we're going to bounce out of that pretty quickly. One thing we've actually, a big major thing for us, the sort of system that we were pursuing up until the sort of mid-90s was very reliant upon making a vast quantity of really good silage, and to make really good silage in Cumbria is quite a challenge in any year, but to actually hook all your profit on basically one day in the summer of making that one big pit full of first cut silage, it seemed ludicrous to me. So we've moved away from that. We still make a lot of silage, but it's actually essentially it's a dry cow late lactation feed, so the importance of making excellent silage has been removed. So I've probably covered most of this. How have we grown from 40 to 1,000 cows? We've effectively changed completely the way we farm. We've changed our yield from our focus from yield per cow to sort of profit per hectare. So we're looking much more at how efficiently we farm rather than just how full the tank is all the time. We've moved away from what was quite a mixed sort of a cropping. We were always growing a bit of cereals before, and with both farms really now are down to perennial ryegrass. And we're producing anywhere from sort of 12 to 15, 16 tons of dry matter. In a bad year, 2012, we probably struggled to grow about 10 tons, but on average, we're probably growing about 13 tons of dry matter across both farms, utilising about 85% of that, which is pretty good going, really, for what we're doing. So I'll just go through the basics, really, of what is a relatively simple system. We started doing this right back in the sort of mid-90s. I was probably the first person with a plate meter in the north of England. This device here on the left is a rising plate meter. I'm pretty sure it's all a New Zealand device. I think it was developed in New Zealand. It's become a little bit more specialised in recent years with a little computer on it. Basically, we walk across the paddock and drop this 40, 50 times, and it measures both the grass density and the sward height. So it gives you an idea of the amount of grass dry matter that's actually present on the paddock. But because we're doing this at least once a week, sometimes twice a week during the main growing season, we've got an idea every time we go how much grass has grown since last time we went. So we put all this information into a computer, and that actually guides us as to where and when we graze, whether we take silage out of the round, whether or not we put fertiliser on or we don't. And it's a key part of what we do. This, I guess, for us, this is our sort of Keenan feed wagon, really. This measures all the feed that's consumed on the farm. An absolutely critical part of what we do. We're aiming to graze for around about 250 to 260 days of the year, if possible, and reduce our winter. And this is a key part. We're building covers up in the autumn, so we need to know what's going on. We need to know how much grass we're growing. And likewise, just as important in the spring when we don't want to run out of grass. We're out sort of early to mid-February, and we don't want to run out of grass. So it's key to us that we know within a reasonable amount of accuracy how much grass dry matter there is actually present on the farm. Rotational grazing, it's simple enough if you understand it. Pre-96, we thought we were making reasonably good use of grass. The cows sort of went out into a paddock, and then when that was grazed, they went through to the next paddock, and we were walking over regrowths, and really, looking back now, we didn't really have a clue what we were doing. Very simply, a little bit of money invested in electric fences, and you can actually tidy up your grazing pattern no end, and actually start making use of grass and start to value grass. So we're allocating grass, anything from 12 to 36 hours, but no longer than 36 hours. More typically, it's a new break of grass every 12 hours. And then they wouldn't go back to that area, that paddock, for anywhere between 18 to sort of 24 days during the season. And that, going through the process of learning how to do that and seeing the effects that had on the regrowth was quite revolutionary for me, to see how much more grass we can grow by just simply protecting regrowths. Somewhere in the region of almost 30% more grass, simply by having an electric fence up and not letting them graze back over it. Another key part of what we do is the block spring calving, actually trying to build demand for grass when grass is growing at its fastest rate. So we're calving the cows in a relatively tight spring block. Obviously highly fertile New Zealand genetics, so that enables us to do that. We're calving February, March, April on Dolphinby Farm. We're slightly later at home, so 3 weeks later at home, but as tight as we possibly can really in that period, so that we're going out in the spring and we're ramping up demand for grass and consuming as much of that grass at source rather than having to go in with a mower and put it into the silage pit. We will use the mower at various parts of the year. Our silage now is a sort of secondary activity. It's there to control the quality and the amount of grass that we've got in front of the cows. And we'll also use a mower when we don't need to make silage, to pre-mow quite a bit of grass. So we'll go in there, pre-mow the rejected areas, let it wilt for 12 hours, and then let the cows gather that up. That seems a really effective way of making sure that you're fully utilising the grass that you've got. It's almost winding the clock back to the beginning of March. You're getting rid of the rejected areas, but you're actually then enabling a whole area to come back into production. And genetics. I mean, I forget actually how far down this road we've gone into quite a different cow. I quite a wake-up call this year. I went to the Highland Show for the first time for quite a long time, and I stood at the judging ring watching the Holsteins being judged, and man, I was astonished by these cows. I mean, I've probably got a little bit out of touch now with the sort of Holstein genetics, but they're so different from what we've got now. At least 150, probably 200 kilograms heavier. And you really do, you've got to see these cows really to believe how different they are. But to the consumer, to a lot of people, a black and white cow is a black and white cow, but they're like chalk and cheese, really. We're very fortunate in that we've adopted a system where there are already genetics in the world that can supply our needs, so all what we use comes from New Zealand. The other key part of what we do really is the infrastructure. I sort of alluded to the fact before that we would walk through a paddock and then on to the next, and we would have a block at the end of the farm that we made into silage. So we had definite defined areas where we were silaging and where we were grazing. Now, the whole farm now, where it's accessible, is a grazing block. So access tracks absolutely critical. We've put in about 5 kilometres of tracks at Dolphinby. Use quite a lot of old railway sleepers upside down, make a very good track. Home, we've got a reasonably good source of rock, so we've put in a similar amount of tracks at home, and we can access almost all of the farm now, really, with good access tracks. It's key to getting cows, certainly either end of the season when weather isn't particularly good, to get cows to and from grass without damaging, the grass in the meantime. As is water, you've got to be able to get in. If you're slicing a paddock of 4 or 5 hectares up into maybe 5 or 6 feeds, you've got to have access to water for a big herd of cows. And it goes without saying, good simple electric fencing. For a long time we didn't have a lot of mains electric fencing because we were growing a herd and we didn't really know the size of the paddocks we wanted. But we've done a bit more of that in the last few years, and certainly Dolphinby was set up with a lot of mains electric fencing so that it's there, it's easy for staff to manage big numbers of cows. If I've glossed over a lot of the detail in there, please do ask questions at the end. We've just changed our milk buyer at home, and I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on this. One farm supplies the Lake District Creamery at Pastures and makes Lake District cheese. The other farm is actually just supplying Nestlé from the 1st of January, and this is quite a few of you might be familiar with this RISE. This is response-inducing sustainability evaluation. I'm one of probably 2 or 3 farmers in the country that Nestlé have put through the process, this sort of evaluation process. And I think this is something that, as dairy farmers, we're going to see more of in the future. And this actually isn't my I don't know what you call that picture of the farm. We actually scored reasonably well, other than a big weakness that I'm going to come on to in a minute. But I think this was a really in-depth. It took a good day or so to go through a whole load of figures with a lady, and we put all this stuff in the computer. And it's very revealing when you read the report. Although I know the business really well, it's sort of really highlighted the weaknesses that we've got within the business. And to date, actually, I've done quite a bit of research just recently to try and see which type of dairy farm is actually the most environmentally sound, whether it's high input, whether it's low input. Leaving organics to one side, just for that argument. There doesn't seem to be any really compelling evidence yet as to whether my system of intensive grazing is any better than house systems of intensive milk production. There's very little data out there without a whole load of assumptions that can actually paint that picture. So this might be this might shed some light on actually what is and what isn't sustainable in the future. And I actually thought we had quite a sustainable dairy farming system until a couple of years ago. I was lucky enough to do a Nuffield farming scholarship, and once I got more of a global perspective and started to do a lot of study about how food is produced and how we're producing food really globally rather than sort of domestically, I sort of realised that there's some major holes in what we're doing. And I sort of got a lot out of the first presentation from Elaine Ingram yesterday. I think there's a lot of really good thinking and evidence now that we've ignored what's going on, really, our main asset beneath our feet. It's so easy just to pick up the phone, order a load of fertiliser, and it's still relatively cheap, but we're not really aware, a lot of us. We're becoming more aware, but there are a lot of dairy farmers out there that are completely unaware of what's actually going on beneath their feet. So I thoroughly enjoyed yesterday. And that is our major weakness, is sort of our addiction to nitrogen fertiliser. But however much I would want to change, it's very, very difficult for me. I've grown a big business. We've taken on a lot of debt to grow that business. We've got another business that's, we're hooked into a very high rent. So at what point can I make that break from sort of a conventional nitrogen junkie, if you like, to, a more of a sensible, sustainable, semi-organic or even totally organic approach? So I really want to leave you. I don't know how I'm doing for time, Chairman, but I want to leave you with this, and this will make Patrick smile down here. It's a long story, but I became aware of the Sustainable Food Trust whilst I was actually in California on my Nuffield travels, and things sort of progressed. And I spent a fascinating few days with Patrick and his colleagues and quite a lot of other people really from around the world in December 2013 at the True Cost Accounting Conference in London. And I think combining that experience with what I learned from my Nuffield, I think, and we bounce these ideas about. Yesterday we sat through quite a lot of discussion about what's right and what's wrong, but we're ignoring the economics, I think, and it's key. Certainly to me as a practical dairy farmer, the economics are absolutely key. If the economics aren't right, I've got a responsibility to myself, to my, we employ 12 people now, so there's a lot of families dependent on what we do, and you can't ignore the economics, however strong the arguments are to do otherwise. So we've got to get ourselves as a food industry that we can't ignore the economics. At some point, we've actually got to incorporate the full cost of what we're all doing, or what we're not doing, because there's a plus and a minus to this, into what is sensible food production. And I don't see that we've got to make a big deal of progress until we get there. That's sort of my feeling, really. And at what point, and whose job is it really? Who's got the moral obligation really to inform the uninformed? Because I get the same sort of sense and feeling from this event as I got from the Sustainable Food Trust event last year. There's a lot of really good things and a lot of really good sentiment there, but we've got to hook this up to economics if we're going to make progress, and absolutely key. But so that's about me. I'm looking forward to your questions, and Thank you very much.